Welcome back to part 5. So we're going to start talking about this resolveNode function. And first let me explain what it is. resolveNode is a function that's provided by LiveCycle to help us get around this problem we had at the end of our last video, where we can't use variables in our object references. In other words, we want to iterate through all the rows and all the cells, and this kind of JavaScript notation won't allow us to do that because JavaScript reserves these kind of brackets notation for arrays, and we're not using an array, we're using a table object. So if we go to table month and we type .resolveNode, we get this pop-up here, and here's what the help screen talks about resolveNode, and this is not very helpful. It evaluates the specified SOM expression. That's what these little object references are, a SOM expression, beginning with the current XML form object, model object, and returns the value of the object specified. Not very helpful. So let me say it in a way that's more helpful. Basically what resolveNode does is it allows us to use the names in the hierarchy in a way that we can cut them up into pieces and use variables as pieces of the name. So in this case, we want to use row, but we want to be able to append on the end of it whichever row the value of j is currently specifying in the current loop we're doing. So if we put row in quotes and then plus j, this would equal the first time through row 1. So it's like saying row 1. But we want that to be able to change time and again. The second time through, we want it to say row 2, the third time through 3, and so on. And so this allows us to use the j variable in the statement, the SOM expression, if you want to say it in official JavaScript terms. And so we can do it that way. But we're also double looping here. We're in a nested loop. We want to utilize the j for the row value. We want to utilize the I for the cell value. And so we can keep going with this. We can keep going by saying plus cell, actually I have to put a period there, cell, and then plus I dot raw value. And now what we're doing is saying each time through the loop, we're going to assign whichever cell the loop is putting us in, we're going to assign a raw value into that cell. And so in this example for right now, I'm just going to put got here so we know we got to that actual point. I'm going to take away all of this because that's not working. That produces an error. And let's see if it works. Let's try it out. So we're going to select a date to make the function go. And now we have a got here in every cell, which is exactly what we expected from our script. So this is a powerful function. resolveNode allows us to do something that we normally wouldn't be able to do. We can loop through the whole entire table, every row, every cell, and do something based on the iteration of the loop that we're in. And imagine us trying to type this out longhand. We would have to have a statement about this long for each cell and put the exact value we wanted to put in there. And it couldn't vary at all. It couldn't vary with month to month like we want it to. So this really helps us. But I'm going to do it for this example. I'm just going to put this and say clear all cells. That's why we wrote this function in the first place. We just want to clear the cells out so that when we choose a date and it fills it out, and when we choose another date, it wipes away clean the table and the rows first and then pushes into the table and rows the new values. Okay, so now that we have that problem solved, we need to solve the next problem. And again, if you remember me saying back in an earlier video, you know, these types of scripts, this advanced scripting presents us with a lot of different problems. And you need to take them in bite-sized chunks, use an algorithm. So we need to create a JavaScript object that represents the entire chosen month. In other words, we need to make an array. What is an array? Well, it's basically saying something like this. It's creating a variable that has multiple values. So here's an array I just created. It's called myArray, and it has 5 values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I wanted to access, let's say in this example, the third value, I could say something like this, myArray, and then I would use the brace, and I would say 2, like that. And in this example, this would equal 3, because the 0, 1, 2 cell in our array has the value of 3. Remember, arrays are ordinal, much like everything else in JavaScript. And so we need an array that is 42 cells. There's 42 possible days on our table, 7 times 6. And so we need to have a 42 cell array. Okay, so we hopefully have a good understanding now of what an array is. Let's make an array, and we're going to call it calendar days. And for the beginning of this, we're not going to put any values in it. So right now this is just an empty array, and we're going to use it to create the logical representation of all this using a loop. But this needs to be a very interesting loop. It needs to be a 3-part loop. Basically, we need to put 3 things into this array. We need to fill up, we know there's 42 cells in the array, and the 42 cells are going to be equal to the number of days in the month plus the number of days, the number of, we'll call it empty days, at the beginning of the month, and then we have the number of empty days at the end. And what do I mean by all this? Well, let's do a quick preview. If we look on the date picker, let's say for January, we have 1, 2, 3 days at the top of our month here, January 2020, that in our form will be empty, the 29th, 30th, and 31st of December of the previous month. And then if we go all the way down, we're going to have an empty cell here on Saturday because that's the next month, February. And then we're going to have a whole row of empty cells at the bottom. And if you add 3 plus 31 plus 8, what do you get? You get 42, the contents of all of our cells. And so we need a way to take our array that's currently empty and fill it with 42 values, but we want the values to be exactly what the given month, the selected month, would warrant. And so really we need to change this little thing around here. We don't want this first. We want the number of empty days at the beginning first. And we'll just call this first days loop. And then we need to add to that the number of days in the month. So we'll just say, we'll call that month days. And then we're going to need to add to that the number of empty days at the end of the month. And we'll just call this last days loop. So we need basically 3 loops. 3 for loops like we've defined up here. Not nested, just 3 of these kind of loops. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, copy it, I'm going to paste it down here. I'm going to comment this out just so that doesn't get recognized by JavaScript as code. All right. So what did the first day's loop encompass? Well, it encompasses everything from day 0 or day 1 to the first day of the month, which could be any day. But we already have found this value. We've already found what value is the first day of the month. We found that up here with this value right here. We've gotten the first day. First day is a variable we declared, which is day 1 of the month. And we've already found first column right here, meaning which column are we starting in for the particular month we've chosen. And so first column would represent where we want to begin counting 1, 2, 3, and so on. So if we make our first loop 1 through first column, and we change this to not say I is less than or equal to, but we say I is less than first column, We actually have to start with 0. 0, because we said this is ordinal. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This loop then would represent however many of these days are empty. It could be none of them, or it could be 6 of them. There's never going to be a case where this is entirely empty, like at the bottom. Here it could be as many as 6 days or as little or none empty. So what we're going to do here then, let me just move this out of the way. We're going to start building our array that's currently empty inside of this loop, and we're going to say calendar days bracket I bracket equals nothing. We want it to be empty. So we're saying this is the loop that creates the empty, and we're going to put that in brackets, at the beginning of the month. All right, so that's our first loop. Our second loop needs to be the actual days of the month, 1 through 31 or 1 through 28, or however many days are in the month. And we already know that value. We've already created a variable that's called last day. We've answered the question, how many days are in the month? 28, 29, 30, or 31. It has to be one of those 4 values. Well, whatever last day is equals one of those 4 values. So we can create our second loop and say, we're going to start now with first column as our beginning point. That's going to be the first day that we're starting to count now. And we're going to continue on until I is less than or equal to the last day of the month. But we have to remember, we're already 4 or 5 days in, maybe, possibly. So we have to also add first column to this value. And then we're going to increment I, just like we do in every other loop. And so inside this, we're going to do something similar to this right here. We're going to add values to our array, but instead of putting a blank in there, we're actually going to put a number. We're going to put in a counting device. We need something like, we need a way to count one by one through all the days. All right, and we already know how many days there are. Let's say in this first example, there's 28. We have to do something that's going to count 28 days. So we need a counting variable. So let's come back up here and create a counting variable. We'll call it integer days. It's going to be an integer value. So we're going to start off with the number 1. The first time through the loop, we want to put day 1. We want to put integer days to string. Now the reason I put that to string on the end is because the variable is an integer, and I don't want it to put in, this is a text field. I don't want it to put an integer value in the text field. I want it to put a text value. It's going to look the same to the end user, but this is just a way to be sure that the first time through it's going to be the number 1, and I want it to be the text value of the number 1. And I don't mean O-N-E, I mean written in JavaScript it would be something like that, the value of 1 inside of brackets. JavaScript treats numbers as either text or numeric values, and I don't want it to treat it as a numeric value this time. But also I want to do something else. I want to append on the end of this something else. So I'm going to put the concatenate operator right there, the plus sign, and then I'm going to concatenate onto the end of this string a carriage return and a line feed. And what that will do is that will create a situation where if the first day of the month is the number 1, it also adds the carriage return so that it moves down to the next line, so that when somebody comes up into this cell after everything is done in our script, they can start typing on line 2. It's already got the carriage return there. And that's just for convenience sake. We don't necessarily have to do that. But just for your understanding, /r/n are the JavaScript way of saying carriage return line feed. Okay. But we need to do one more thing in our loop. We also need to increment this value of integer days by 1 each time we come through the loop. So we need to say integer days plus plus. And all that's doing is saying the first time through, we're on day 1. The second time through, we're on day 2. And so on until we get to the last value of the last day, either 28, 29, 30, or 31. It's going to keep counting. So that's the second loop. The first loop was, what did we say? The first loop is going to be the first days that has empty days. The second loop we just did, that's all the month days. And now the last loop is going to be all the empty ones at the end. So let's do one more for loop. So we're going to start where we ended before, last day, first column. We're going to end at day 41, which is, remember, ordinally counting. If this was 0 here, this would be 41. So there's 42 cells, but we're counting ordinally, so we start counting at the number 0. And we're going to increment I inside of our loop. And then what are we going to do? We're going to say calendar days, which is our array still, equals nothing. Just putting just an empty value in. And so once we do that, we've gotten to the end of our third loop. So we've accomplished our algorithm. We've accounted for all 42 cells. And so now we've built this array called calendar days that we can now use to feed the information into the form. But we still have one more step to go. We have to take the values and actually feed them in there. And that's going to take one last, we've done this, so let's get rid of this. We need to get the array values into table month, meaning we need to combine basically what we did here with what we did here and feed the values in. So let's just copy this and paste it in the bottom. This is our loop that goes through every row and every cell. And instead of putting empty in there, let's actually put the value of the calendar days. So let's say calendar days. And what's the value going to be? And so how are we going to control which day of the calendar days goes in to our form, our table row, our table cell? Well, we need another variable. We need one last variable. We're just going to call it z. And it's going to start off equaling 0, and it's going to increment each time. And that value is going to be the value that goes into calendar days. Because remember, calendar days is an array that we built up here, and we know it has 42 cells in it. And we know it's already laid out in the order we want. It's got so many blank days at the beginning, it's got the exact amount of days in the month, and it's got the exact amount of blank spaces at the end that we need. That's already been pre-built. Now we just need to feed that back into the table month. And so we use resolveNode and row J and cell I to get us to the cell we're currently needing to get to. And then we just walk through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 values in our calendar days array to finish off filling the cell. One last thing before we test to see if our script is actually going to work. I noticed that I had an error in this line of code where I'm declaring, or I'm creating the variable last day. When I typed it for you before, I didn't have this end on it. I just had this right here. I need to make this get date. And so what I was saying was create a variable called last day, and that would be a fully qualified JavaScript variable where it would be if the day of the week, the month, day, year, and all that. I don't want all that. I just want the actual date, 1 through 31. That's the value I want. I don't want that big, huge JavaScript formatted date. And so the script was not going to work correctly unless I came back up here and edited that. But now we have everything we need in the entire script, all the loops, and then finally the populating table month here. So we can test. We'll select December 11th like we've been, and it counts entire month of December 2019 and goes all the way through into the form. We can even look here at the date picker. December 2019 started on a Sunday and it ended on a Tuesday. And that's exactly what we see here. So we did it. The script works. Does exactly what we want it to do. And there's really only one thing left to do in this project, and that is just to take care of this final row down here that is not needed most of the time. Sometimes it's needed when a day with 31 days starts on a Friday or Saturday, and day 31 ends up being a Sunday down here. We need it for that reason, but if that month doesn't apply, we don't need it. So let's just get an example of when we would need it. A day like May of 2020. We need that final row. But in December of 2019, we don't need it. So we need a little piece of our script just to make that disappear. And so let's type that out real quick at the very bottom. We're going to use an if statement. We're going to use an if statement. If table month, row 6, dot cell 1, dot raw value, and that's it. And what that's saying is if it equals anything except empty, so if it has any value at all in it, we want table month dot row 6 dot presence, so the whole row, to be hidden, and then else we want it to show. So this exact same statement, table month, row 6, presence, visible. And all we're doing there is saying hide it or show it based on the value of this cell. If that cell has a 30, 31 in it, it needs to stay visible. If it doesn't, hide it. Now let's test that by going back to December 11th. And now as I'm reading through it, I see a problem. I don't want it to hide if there is a value. I want it to hide if there isn't a value. And so I'm going to use the not operator. If there's not a value there, meaning it's empty or it's null, hide it. Else, if there is a value, make it show. So let's test. December 11th or 18th, doesn't matter. And now that bottom row disappeared altogether. But when we go to May, it reappears when it's needed. All right, so that's it. That's the calendar form in all its glory. We have a script that's roughly 90 lines long, and that may have seemed insurmountable at the beginning, but when you break it up into an algorithm, into different pieces, into the individual parts, and you think through each part and debug along the way, you can do great things in JavaScript. So this is a great example of advanced scripting. And we're going to continue this series on and show how resolveNode and looping can do bigger and better things. Other examples, try to get you to understand a complete picture of what these things can do because they are very powerful. And so here at the very end of the video, I'll let the music play for a while and I'll expose the entire script for you to read and copy down if you need to. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.